Well, that did get close, and certainly a lot closer than it ever needed to be, but they did get the job done. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken take care of business, defeating the Columbus Blue Jackets 4-2 in a game where they very much needed those 2 points, and to win this game that they had really no business losing. Not just because the Blue Jackets are a struggling team and the Kraken have been playing pretty well and have aspirations of making the playoffs, but also because the Blue Jackets were on the second half of a back-to-back after having blown a 3-goal lead in the third period to Vancouver the night before. And while the Kraken certainly did give it at least a good think as far as giving Columbus the symmetry of blowing a 3-goal lead in the third period and then coming back from a 3-goal deficit the night after, they managed to hold on to end up winning this one with an empty netter at the end. But before we can get to the end of the game, we should probably start back at the beginning with the Kraken trotting out the same lineup that they had against the Blues, which included Joey Daccord. And that is something that I definitely found to be a bit of a surprise, not because I think Joey played as bad as his stats looked in that game against St. Louis. Again, at least 3 of those 4 goals that he let in on just, 18, 19 shots were goals that he never had a chance on in the first place. Either way, it was one where I thought with Grubauer coming back from an injury, it seemed like a good opportunity for them to give Grubauer that one start to get his legs back under him and knock off some of that rust at the NHL level against, again, a team that is struggling mightily at the end of a road trip or towards the end of a road trip and on the second half of a back-to-back, plus it being the last home game before the All-Star break. In the end, though, they stick with Daccord, and well, they end up winning, although Daccord really didn't have to work that hard to make that happen. Well, I mean, he did have to make a decent number of saves, 30 on 32 shots, but again, in a lot of ways, this was kind of an opposite type of game as what he faced against the Blues a couple nights ago, where in that game, he didn't face a ton of shots on goal, but the ones that he did face, and certainly the ones that ended up past him, or 3 of them anyway, were very high danger and would have taken save of the year type of saves to keep out of the net. Whereas in this game, he faces 32 shots, but not one of them was nearly as high danger as at least 3 of the ones that ended up past him in that game against St. Louis. Anyway, I'm not trying to take away from the night that Joey had, which still was a good night for the Kraken, and he did have some good saves in among those 30 saves that he made. He just wasn't forced to work nearly as hard, at least when it came to the quality of shots, as we've seen him have to do here in the recent past. Either way, he still does keep the majority of the shots out of the net, and that did include a couple in this first period that very much could have ended up in it, especially if he had allowed rebounds, and that is one thing that he continued to do very well in this game, just not allowing very many rebound chances. Even still, this is one of the best first periods the Kraken have played in quite some time. In fact, I would say certainly their best first period since the end of the winning streak, and probably even going a few games back into the end of it, where the first few games of that road trip weren't necessarily their strongest starts to games, even if they did end up winning them in the end. Either way, this first period, they pretty much dominate from start to finish with a couple of decent chances the Blue Jackets get around the middle of the period. There's a rush chance they get a clean look on. Joey makes that save, I think, with the glove hand. And then a tip on net that he's positioned perfectly for and doesn't allow a rebound. So again, Joey doing a very good job with the chances that do end up on net, just the Kraken defensively not making him work nearly as hard or see those passes across his face for shots on the backside like we saw happen against the Blues. Now, yes, the Blue Jackets do keep the shot on goal total pretty even by the end of the period. I think it's like 8-10 in favor of the Kraken, and in fact, the Blue Jackets actually led the shots on goal for a good chunk of this period. But at the same time, I kept looking up at that total and seeing the Blue Jackets in the lead and just being baffled that they somehow had more shots than the Kraken. Honestly, I couldn't remember a lot of them happening even after watching the entire game. Again, aside from the 2, they were mostly from the outside and just not hard saves for Joey to make. Meanwhile, at the other end of the ice, the Kraken were getting their chances, and they were pretty good ones at that. And eventually, thanks to that pressure, the Kraken get their first power play of the game, not long after the halfway point of the first period. And on that power play, Jordan Eberle ends up scoring. The Kraken don't get off to the best start, but eventually get back into the offensive end, cycle the puck a couple times. Bjorkstrand fires off a shot that ends up not quite going on net. It gets tipped and partially blocked, I guess, by a Blue Jacket on its way to the net, but then goes off the stick of Eberle right next to the net and redirects back into the side of it to give the Kraken the 1-0 lead. Eberle his 8th of the season. Even if he does catch a bit of a break here, the puck barely touches his stick, but just enough to redirect it from going just wide of the net to just barely into it. The Kraken will happily take the power play goal and that 1-0 lead. Then a couple minutes later, back at 5-on-5, it's once again that line, or I guess I should say the line that Eberle's on with McCann and Tatar. They get a 3-on-1 or maybe 3-on-2 rush chance back towards the Columbus net after a sloppy play by Columbus at the Kraken blue line. With Tatar starting the play, he gets it up to Eberle in the neutral zone. Eberle carries it into the offensive end and then gets the one pass across a poorly defended 2-on-1 rush it turns into to McCann, who just winds up, fires off that wrist shot, and it hits a bullet into the back of the net under the blocker of Tarasov to give the Kraken the 2-0 lead, and for McCann, his 20th of the season, as he becomes the first Kraken player to hit that 20-goal mark on the season, and it makes it 3 seasons in a row, all 3 with the Kraken, with at least 20 goals for McCann. Of course, last year he doubled that, and we'll have to see if he can get hot enough to make that happen again this year. But either way, he has definitely picked it up here of late, and for Eberle with the primary assist, it's his second point of the period. And from there, the Kraken keep up the offensive pressure, which eventually leads to a power play. A power play that Jordan Eberle ends up scoring on. And wait, before you pause the video thinking that you might have accidentally skipped backwards, or maybe I made a mistake in editing, nope, that isn't what happened, at least this time anyway. This is a different power play goal by Jordan Eberle just a few minutes after his first one that gave the Kraken the 1-0 lead. This time, the Kraken win the faceoff to start the power play and keep it in the offensive end, quickly leading to a shot on goal from McCann from his normal McCann spot. That shot is saved, but it leaks out of Tarasov in net. Definitely one that he probably should freeze like we've seen Decord do at the other end of the ice, but it comes out of Tarasov and quickly ends up being picked up by Eberle, who just kind of circles around to the side of the net and puts it right past Tarasov, who's out towards the top of the crease, leaving a big gap there. Eberle just slides it into the net, and it's 3-0 Kraken. Eberle's second goal of the game, second power play goal of the game, and 9th of the season, gives the Kraken that healthy lead going into the first intermission. Though, I say going into the first intermission, Tolvanen almost ends up scoring just a little bit later, but he ends up getting robbed out in front of the net, one-on-one with Tarasov. So, while Tarasov probably should have played the second power play goal for Eberle a little bit better in a couple of different ways, he does come up pretty big to prevent it from being 4-0 going into this first intermission. So then with Tolvanen getting robbed, we head to the third period with the Kraken up 3-0. And no, I didn't misspeak. I did mean to say the third period, because while there was, technically speaking, a second period in this game, pretty much nothing really happens. There are 14 total shots on goal, 6 for the Blue Jackets, 8 for the Kraken, but nothing really dangerous either way. Both teams do end up with a power play, but they overlap for the most part. The Blue Jackets get a power play in the back half of the second that is quickly negated when Tanev gets what would have been a shorthanded breakaway, but his stick gets lumberjack chopped in half from behind him. That's obviously a slash. It's as textbook as a slash gets. So that negates the power play. Nothing happens at 4-on-4 or with the Kraken, 30 seconds of power play at the back end of it. So we go to the third period with, again, still that same score of 3-0. And just to be clear, if you don't believe me that nothing of note really happened in the second period, even the highlight pack just shows the face-off of the second period and then goes right to the face-off of the third. So anyway, like I said, we head to the third period with the Kraken still leading 3-0. And while in the second period, things didn't get uglier for the Blue Jackets, like it looked like it was kind of going to go that way after how the first period ended, and Eberle still hasn't scored again to make a lot of heads in Climate Pledge Arena slightly colder. It's still a safe lead for the Kraken entering this third period, where they've pretty much controlled the game the entire way, even if they didn't keep up the offensive constant pressure in the second period that we saw in the first. Unfortunately, however, things do end up getting interesting, and they start getting interesting not too long into the second period. The Blue Jackets get a power play, which they get a couple of decent chances on, nothing super dangerous like we saw with the Blues, but still some of their best chances of the game. They don't score on the power play, but shortly after it, they do end up finding the back of the net on a shot that's a rush chance and is partially blocked by Schultz, I think it was, that was in front of this shot. It's probably one that Decord could have had, but it's a nice shot. It ends up breaking up the shutout. It's 3-1 just before the halfway point of the second period. And while it was a bummer to see potentially another shutout for Decord get ruined, and it really did look like it was heading that way with how the first two periods went, to the Kraken credit, they do end up responding very well to this goal, nearly getting one right back the other way. It's once again Tolvanen on a rush chance that one-on-one he gets robbed for a second time by Tarasov, who, after allowing that pretty bad goal to Eberle for the third goal for the Kraken was fantastic in net the rest of the night for the Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets, through all of the Kraken pressure that they don't score on, end up finding the back of the net again with 4 minutes remaining. And of course, once again, it's the same Columbus Blue Jacket that got them on the board in the first place, and not any of the guys you would think would be scoring 2 goals in a game for them, or at least not the only 2 goals in a game, like Gaudreau, Fantilli, although Fantilli did end up leaving the game early after a weird hit along the boards in front of the Blue Jackets bench on McCann, where he ended up coming up favoring his foot. Hopefully he's okay, an exciting young player, and yeah, I mean, hopefully that isn't something lasting for him. Not Kent Johnson, yeah, any of the potential guys that you would expect to score for the Blue Jackets consistently. That having been said, for Shinnikov, it is his 13th and 14th goals on the season that he scores here against the Kraken. And on top of that, this one in particular is just a very nice individual effort from Shinnikov. It comes off a face-off just outside the Kraken blue line in one of those neutral zone locations that's won backwards by Gord towards Wennberg, but ends up getting past Wennberg, bouncing off the boards, while Shinnikov goes straight through Wennberg, lifts his stick as he goes along the boards, splitting the boards and Wennberg, taking the puck, getting through Alexiak, and then right up to the net where he fires off a shot, and it's an absolute dart perfectly placed to the top corner of the far side of the net to give the Blue Jackets and Shinnikov his second of the game, bringing them to within 1 with 4 minutes left. And while normally in a circumstance like this one, there still would be some nerve setting in with it being a 1-goal game, but I would still feel pretty good about the Kraken chances to win with just 4 minutes left. It was certainly a lot more nerve-wracking after what had just happened with the blown 2-goal lead in the third period of that game against the Blues that forced overtime, where the Kraken ultimately ended up losing. So with that fresh in the mind, it did make these last 4 minutes particularly nerve-wracking. Eventually, the Blue Jackets go empty net, and with then the 6-on-5 advantage, the Blue Jackets do end up getting 3 more shots on goal, 2 of which I think are for Shinnikov, and anytime he touched the puck with this empty net and in the Kraken end of the ice, I was pretty much bracing myself for the inevitable Columbus natural hat trick to tie the game and send it to overtime. Fortunately, that never happens. Yanni Gord ends up coming up with a huge blocked shot that bounces the puck out of the zone, and as the Blue Jackets try to get it back in the zone, it's broken up by Wennberg, I think. Either way, it ends up on the stick of Tanev, and no sooner is it on his stick, but it's right back off and headed towards the Blue Jackets net, which it goes right down the middle, hitting the middle of the back of the net to give the Kraken the empty net goal, their 4th of the game, to make it 4-2. Tanev his 5th of the season, and the Kraken do survive that late push by the Blue Jackets to tie the game and take the 2 points out of regulation. So obviously for the Kraken, it's a game where they came into it with a significant advantage against a team that's not playing nearly as well as they are, and was on the second half of a road back-to-back in Seattle's building. And they took advantage of that in the first period with a fantastic first frame, getting that 3-goal lead, 2 power play goals, which was a struggle for the Blue Jackets in that game against Vancouver the night before, giving up that 3-goal lead in that third period with 3 power play goals for the Canucks. So yeah, terrible penalty kill here of late for the Blue Jackets. That gets the Kraken rolling, but then they kind of slowly let this game get away from them. A second period that really doesn't go much of anywhere, but that is a downgrade from how the first period went for the Kraken. They were a bit sloppy and just kind of matched the sloppiness of the Blue Jackets in that second period. And then in the third period, the Kraken continued to play a bit sloppy for the majority of it, and the Blue Jackets, as they started to get more desperate, were able to take advantage of that, or at least Shinnikov was able to take advantage of that, as he pretty much single-handedly scored both the goals for the Blue Jackets. But the Kraken really didn't play a great second or third frame. They were just able to get away with it because the Blue Jackets just didn't really have it themselves and couldn't take advantage of the Kraken mistakes. There were a couple of chances they had in either the second or third period, maybe both, that could have ended up as goals, crossing passes across Decord's face that just didn't connect on the far side like they did for the Blues in the game previous. Fortunately, the Kraken do end up surviving it, and if anything, it should serve as a bit of a wake-up call after that runaway of a first period, that they can't just coast through this game and now the one coming up against an equally bad San Jose Sharks team, which had this game turned out to be a 3-0 shutout for the Kraken, or even if they continued to pile on in the second and third period, that game against the Sharks, and it maybe to some extent still is, definitely one that seems like a bit of a trap game for the Kraken, who are now coming off of a win and 5 points in 3 games on the homestand after that losing streak that they had of 4 games. Plus, it is the last game before a 10-day break for them, with all the players certainly having thoughts of probably more tropical places in their heads. Or at least if not more tropical places, definitely trading in their hockey sticks for golf clubs. other than Bjorkstrand, who will be going to the All-Star game, but for the rest of them, looking forward to those vacations. Still that one more game though, so they gotta get things righted here and certainly play a little bit more clean than they did in the second and third period of this game. And again, hopefully that sloppy little bit there and the scare that they got towards the end of this game in the third period will keep them mentally focused in that game against the Sharks. Which again, I kind of would expect Grubauer to start in, but at this point, maybe they just have DeGord play through the break and give Grubauer a start when they come back midway through February. In the end though, regardless of all that and how it ended up happening, the Kraken still do importantly get the result they need out of this game, the 2 points in the standings, and now have the one more before that extended All-Star break to get hopefully a similar or the same result. I mean, maybe not exactly the same. It would be nice if it wasn't quite as close towards the end of the game and they could just have a stress-free win in San Jose. Either way, they definitely need those 2 points. And with that, we'll head to the Kraken 3 stars, where, as always, it's brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you want to help decide the Kraken 3 stars after each and every one of these Kraken games, and at the end of the season, since we are now getting towards the last few games of the season, well, still 32 or 33 games left, but getting into the back half decently, and obviously the All-Star break is a good point to talk about the back half of the season. Once the season comes to an end, whether that's the regular season or the end of the playoff run for the Kraken, it is also the patrons over on Patreon that will help decide the Kraken awards at the end of the season that I've done every other year, but this year will be voted on over on Patreon as well. Anyway, with the stars in this game, I'm not going to disagree with what everybody seemed to consensus say over there. The first star is Jordan Eberle, 3 points, all 3 in the first period, 2 power play goals. And while he doesn't end up getting the hat trick, it would have been kind of fun to see him hit the empty net and get that hat trick, or heck, maybe get the hat trick in the second or third period and not have to worry about hitting an empty net at the end of it. Either way, he doesn't end up getting that, but he does get the Kraken on the board with all 3 of those 2 goals and primary assists, 3 points for him, and had a fantastic game. Otherwise, continuing to play very well for the Kraken here of late. I've said that a number of times. Second star, Jared McCann is the obvious pick there. He gets the goal in the middle of the 2 power play goals for Eberle. Also had an assist on the first power play goal, or second power play goal actually, for Eberle. So 2-point night for McCann. He also remains hot, and again is the first Kraken to hit 20 goals on the season. So the 2 of them really meshing well on that line with Tatar. As far as the third star, I could go with Tatar as the third one, and I suppose I did go with all 3 members of the third line in the last game. So what the heck, we'll go with all 3 members of that first line in this one. We'll go Tatar as the third star. He did have a pretty good game. Ends up getting an assist on the McCann goal. I mean, there's plenty of other guys that could get a mention. Certainly, Tanev is the one that puts it away and saves us at least 30 more seconds of stress as that goal goes in. And maybe it was 13 seconds left in the game. Either way, Tanev saves us a little bit of time of extra, worry and stress towards the end of that game with the empty netter. Borgen had a pretty good game. Bjorkstrand had another very good game and an assist on the first goal. So yeah, lots of guys you could pick from, but just for the sake of the synergy of all 3 members of the third line getting stars, we'll go with all 3 members of that first line getting stars in this one. But as always, if you disagree, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comment section below, who your 3 stars would be, how you felt about this game, how nervous you got towards the end of it, but still get the result that we'd like to see at the end of it, what your feelings are on the Super Bowl, since that also got decided today. While the Kraken did win, it's quite unfortunate that the Lions couldn't have hung on to the 17-point lead they had in the second half, and now I'm forced to cheer for the Chiefs in another Super Bowl, and I really don't like that. But yeah, hate the 49ers, so go Chiefs. With that, though, if you haven't made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, the buttons for that kind of stuff down below to help support the channel. Like and subscribe, of course. I appreciate using them. And until the game against the Sharks, the last one before that long break-in, I will have a couple of videos during the break. I've got some different ideas of what I'm going to do, but we'll have a couple in there. Certainly the last power rankings will come out once the last games are finished before the All-Star break. Regardless, until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.